Hello. Today I'm continuing my look at some of the wines from Bordeaux's 2022 vintage. These have been provided very kindly by Bee Bordeaux consultants, and the wine I'm looking at today is from the Grave. So this is Chateau Ferrande. Now, Chateau Ferrande is an estate in the commune of Castel. So here we're about 10 miles southeast from the outskirts of the city of Bordeaux, just a couple of miles outside the Pessac-Viognan appellation, but still to the northwest of the communes of Barsac and Sauternes. There's some evidence of the fact that the Romans were making wine here, but the chateau actually takes its name from the Ferrande family, and they are the people who, it seems, during the 17th and early 18th century planted vines here, and so began the modern winemaking on this site. And they owned the property up until the 1960s, when they sold the property to the Delnode family. And the Delnodes almost immediately turned over the management of Chateau Ferrande to Castel Group, a large internationally based producer of wines, spirits and soft drinks. And Castel have somewhere in the region of about 20 properties, both in Bordeaux, some in the Loire, some in southern France. And they also have a very large volume of vineyards in Morocco and Tunisia. So initially the estate was managed under a leasing agreement, but then in 1992 Castel bought the property outright from the Delnode family. In the last 30 odd years, Castel have acquired further vineyards and have managed to more than double the size of the vineyard area of this property. So the estate currently has about 97.5 hectares of vineyards, with 90 of those being planted to varieties for the production of red grapes, and that's about a 50-50 split between Merlot and Cabernet Sauvignon. The remaining vineyard obviously is for the production of white grapes, and about 60% of that is made up of a combination of Sauvignon Blanc and Sauvignon Gris, and then the remaining 40% is Semillon. The terroir here, the soils, comprise rock, sand and particularly Gunsian gravel over a subsoil that's high in clay. Now, the Gunsian gravel is a gravel that contains quite a high proportion of quartz. It's a feature that's notable particularly in the soils of Pessac-Viognan to the northeast, that this Gunsian gravel retains the heat of the sunlight during the day and makes it available to the plants in the night. So its action as a heat sink helps the vine better ripen the fruit. The clay subsoils are very good at holding water and means that in periods when there's not much rain, there's still water availability to the plant. The vineyards here are planted with 7,000 vines to the hectare, and the notes I've got make note that that's higher than the minimum planting density required by the appellation here, so that's a quality factor. Viticulture here is certified as being sustainable by an organisation called Terra Vitis. For instance, there's no use of herbicides here, so they don't use sprays to get rid of weeds. So in fact they use mechanical techniques to ensure that weeding is done. There's a fair amount of manual work that goes on in the vineyard, where they'll leaf pluck and they'll green harvest to help ensure total fruit ripeness at picking. The harvest in 2022 took place for the Merlot between the 1st and the 12th of September, and then almost 2 weeks later, on the 23rd of September, they started picking the Cabernet Sauvignon, and the last of the Cabernet Sauvignon was picked on the 3rd of October. Now the notes here tell us that picking was done by machine, and they say that there was onboard sorting, so I don't know what arrangements there were within the picking machine, but there's a degree of sorting has gone on there. And the blend of this is 58% Merlot with 42% of Cabernet Sauvignon. The Merlot component that went into this received a pre-fermentation cold soak. So the fruit was crushed, but it was left at 5 degrees C to prevent fermentation from starting. And that gives a lovely soft extraction, primarily of attractive perfumes and good colour, before a fermentation has started and before there's alcohol to sort of pull tannins and solids out of the wine. So that lasted 15 days. And here at Chateau Ferrande, the individual plots are all fermented separate and kept separate throughout the winemaking process up until blending. All the fermentation took place in temperature controlled stainless steel tanks, and to ensure that extraction was quite soft, temperatures were kept down to 26 to 28 degrees C. So it's not allowing temperatures to get too high, which would extract harsher tannins. Again, to try and ensure that the structure was smooth and supple, there was a 25-day total maceration of the skins in the must and the wine. They also note a controlled oxidation, and although they don't specify it, I wonder if what they're referring to is the use of micro-oxidation, which would be the pumping of a very fine stream of oxygen through the wine, which helps stabilise the wine and polymerise the tannins, which can give it a smoother texture. Half the wine aged in French oak barrels, and of that 40% of that, so 20% of the total, aged in new oak, a further 30% of the barrel component aged in barrels that had one fill beforehand, and the rest matured in second fill and presumably older barrels. So while half the wine aged in barrel, the balance was aged in stainless steel tank, and it's possible that that's where the micro-oxygenation went on, because that would help to mirror the effect of the barrel, which as well as giving the wine flavours and tannins, will also give a gentle oxidation as the wine ages inside them. Now the wine was allowed to age for 10 to 12 months before being blended and bottled. Another thing worth noting is that they say that they don't use SO2, sulfur dioxide, the preservative, at any stage during the winemaking process. So it's not added to fruit on arrival at the winery, and it's not added during maceration. I don't think they're suggesting that this is a natural wine. I think sulfur dioxide will be added to preserve the wine when or before it's bottled, but the sulfur dioxide isn't being used as an extractant during the winemaking process, which can help to draw tannins, flavours and colours out of the fruit. I think the reason for doing this is to give gentle extraction and to make the wine as smooth and approachable at a young age as possible. I think the production process that I've just described for this wine is actually a wine that's being really quite carefully made to fit a commercial price point. This is not a wine that's going to compete with the top Grand Cru Classé. The fact that it's not hand-picked, the fact it doesn't all age in oak. These are compromises that have been made by the winemakers, but they've also done quite a lot of work to mitigate those compromises. And I think we're going to find a wine that's very approachable, very well made, very carefully made, to try and provide a decent quality wine that's lovely and approachable at a relatively accessible price point. So let's have a look at it, shall we? Well, my first impression is that this is a wine that's deep, dark, there's an almost black ruby colour. It's not quite opaque. The wine has 14% alcohol, so I think that's reflecting the generosity and the warmth coming through in the 2022 vintage. It seems to be a little reluctant at this stage to throw any tears on the glass. So let's see what we make of the aroma, shall we? There's a combination there of sort of freshness, almost slightly leafy red plum, and then a deeper, darker, richer, almost slightly cooked red plum through to black plum sort of note. There's a nice freshness there, and as I say, that ever so slightly leafy top note. So let's have a taste. The wine's dry, there's an impressive, open, quite plush textured juiciness to the fruit. Almost like sort of rich black cherry juice at first. There's a nice freshness. I can feel I'm sort of slightly salivating on the edges of my tongue. Once that's passed, there's a drying, slightly dusty note across the mid-palate. And that's where you sort of starting to see more of the dark, black plum, damson, bullace, that sort of fruit. There's almost licoricey concentration, and that slight drying, maybe slightly dusty, slight bitterness coming from the tannins on the mid-palate. It's not astringent, it's not completely drying my mouth out, but the juiciness of the fruit is surrounding it rather than overpowering it. On the back palate, the alcohol seems really nicely in balance. It doesn't stand out as being overly hot. I mean, this is a ripe, open style, but the fruit is keeping the alcohol in check, and the fruit is able to come past the alcohol to give lovely plush, rich, we're back to that sort of juicy, almost black cherry note, damson jam sort of note on the finish. This is all kept lively by what is pretty good acidity. My expectations for a wine at this price level, the Graph, is that normally you'd have a bit more structure, a bit more leanness, a bit more elegance. Instead, this is open, it's accessible. Yes, there is that slight drying note from the tannins, but actually this is quite drinkable now, and those tannins would work quite nicely to match with fatty foods. I mean, undoubtedly this is a wine that you could keep for 5 to 10 years if you wanted to put it in your cellar, but I think the ripeness and the generosity of the vintage, combined with a winemaking style that's trying to emphasise the clean fruit, you know, the fact that some of it stays in stainless steel tanks, that the likelihood there's been micro-oxygenation in this, the overall ripeness level of the fruit, all seem aimed at making this an open, accessible drink. I will leave a link in the notes below to the Wine Searcher webpage for this vintage of this wine, so you can see what price it's available for and where you can buy it. But I do think for a wine of its class, it's showing quite how enjoyable wines from the 2022 vintage can be, and I think it's showing itself to be a great value example of that. So thank you so much for joining us. I do hope you've enjoyed the tasting. If you have, do please press the like button. We'd really appreciate that. If you have any comments you'd like to leave, please pop those in the comments box below. We'd be really interested to hear what you think about the wines we're looking at, the tastings we're doing, or anything else that relates to that. If you have friends you think might like to watch the video, do please pass it on to them. We'd really appreciate your endorsement in that way. I have more of the 2022 vintage wines to review from Bordeaux over the next week or so, so I do hope you'll join me for those, and hopefully we'll see you there. Bye for now.